She was 19 years old, 110 pounds, from a small town in West Virginia, where the biggest news of the week was high school football. And on the morning of March 23rd, 2003, she was sitting in the back of a convoy truck rolling through the streets of a city called Nasiriyah, when the world came apart. This is the story of Private Jessica Lynch, and it is not the story the Pentagon told you. Let's be precise about what happened that morning, because precision matters here in ways that will become clear. The 507 maintenance company had taken a wrong turn. Not a small wrong turn, a catastrophic one. Instead of bypassing Nasiriyah, the convoy drove straight into it, into streets already thick with fighters, into a city that American commanders had been warned was not secure. And the warning had not reached the drivers. Sound familiar? The city had the feel of something about to break. Local fighters had been watching the bridge crossing for 2 days. They knew American convoys were moving through. They had positioned themselves on rooftops, in alleyways, behind low walls and rusted market stalls. And they waited. When the first vehicle rolled into the kill zone, they opened up from 3 directions at once. It was not a battle in any conventional sense. It was an ambush. The kind where most of the people being shot at don't even understand in those first seconds where the fire is coming from. Jessica Lynch had enlisted at 17. Her mother signed the papers. They needed the money. Her family lived in a town called Palestine, West Virginia, where the textile mill had closed and half the men her father's age were out of work.
I promise.
The military offered a signing bonus, healthcare, a way forward that the town itself could no longer provide. She trained as a supply clerk, not a combat role, not a trigger puller. Her job was to manage parts inventories and maintenance records, the unglamorous machinery of keeping an army moving. She had been in Iraq for 3 weeks when the convoy entered Nasiriyah. What does it actually feel like when a vehicle takes fire in an ambush? Soldiers who survived March 23rd describe it the same way in interview after interview. The sound hits before your brain can process what it means. Then, the vehicle in front of you shudders and stops. Then, someone is screaming a direction, left, right, and nobody can hear it above the noise. Jessica's truck stalled. The driver was hit. She tried to climb out. Her vehicle was struck again, this time from close range, and the impact threw her forward into the dashboard. Her legs took the worst of it. Both arms were injured. She couldn't stand. Around her, the convoy was dissolving. Some vehicles managed to turn and push through. Others couldn't move. Soldiers were dragging each other across pavement, behind trucks, behind anything that offered cover that wasn't much cover at all. It lasted 11 minutes. 11 minutes of continuous fire in an open street in a city where nobody was coming to help. When it stopped, 11 American soldiers were dead. Several were missing, and Jessica Lynch was unconscious in the street. She was picked up by Iraqi fighters. She was taken to the Saddam Hussein General Hospital on the other side of the city. And that was the last anyone officially knew of her for 9 days. Back in Palestine, West Virginia, her mother got a knock on the door. A soldier in dress uniform. A sentence that parents of service members have dreaded since there have been wars to fight. We regret to inform you, her daughter was listed as missing in action. Not dead, not captured, missing. which is, in some ways, the cruelest word of all, because missing means you don't know. Missing means every time the phone rings. Here is what was happening inside the Pentagon while Jessica's mother sat in her living room, not knowing. The war was not going the way the briefings had promised. The drive to Baghdad had stalled in places. Supply lines were stretched. The resistance in southern Iraq, which senior commanders had predicted would evaporate, was proving persistent and costly. The Pentagon needed a story. Not just any story, a specific kind. An American soldier in danger, against the odds, surviving. And they found one. 9 days after the ambush, a team of Special Operations soldiers fast-roped into the Saddam Hussein General Hospital in Nasiriyah at 2 in the morning. The raid was filmed by a military cameraman embedded with the team specifically for this purpose. The footage showed green-tinted night vision images, soldiers moving fast through corridors, kicking open doors, shouting, "Go, go, go!" And then, a stretcher, a young woman's face, her eyes opening. Jessica Lynch, brought out alive. The footage hit American television within hours, and by noon, it had become the story of the war. What the Pentagon said happened. Private Jessica Lynch had fought back during the ambush. She had fired her weapon until it ran dry. She had been shot multiple times while continuing to engage the enemy. She had been captured only after refusing to surrender. She had been mistreated in captivity, and her rescue had required an opposed military operation against armed resistance. Every major news outlet repeated this, word for word, without verification. Within the first 24 hours. By the following morning, Jessica Lynch was on the front page of every newspaper in the country. The Pentagon called her a real-life G.I. Jane. She was 19 years old, from a town most people couldn't find on a map, and she had no idea any of this was being said. Because she was still in a military hospital in Germany, sedated, recovering from multiple fractures. What actually happened? Her weapon had not been fired. It jammed early in the ambush, and in the chaos of the crash, she never discharged it. This was confirmed by forensic examination of the weapon itself. She had not been shot. Her injuries, severe as they were, came entirely from the vehicle crash. Broken arm, broken leg, spinal fractures. No bullet wounds, no knife wounds. The injuries of a person thrown violently against metal at speed. She had not been mistreated in the hospital. The Iraqi doctors who treated her had, in fact, tried to return her to American forces 2 days before the rescue, sending an ambulance to a checkpoint, which was turned back by fire. The doctors had given her blood transfusions. They had operated on her spine. They had, by any measure, kept her alive. And the rescue itself? No resistance. The hospital had been emptied of fighters hours before the operation. The Special Operations team encountered no armed opposition. The filming, the shouted commands, the atmosphere of urgent danger, all of it was real in the sense that these were real soldiers performing real actions. But nobody shot back, because there was nobody there to shoot back. Where did the story come from? That question took months to answer, and the answer, when it came, was not complicated. A senior Pentagon communications officer, when later asked under oath about the sourcing of the initial briefing, said the information had come from a compilation of early field reports. Field reports that had not been verified, compiled before anyone had actually interviewed the soldiers who were there, released to the press within hours of the rescue, before anyone had spoken to Jessica Lynch herself. She was still sedated. Nobody had asked her what happened. They didn't need to. The story was already written. This is the part that should make you pause. Think about what it takes to put a story like that into the world in less than 24 hours. Someone had to write a briefing. Someone had to approve it. Someone had to hand it to reporters. Someone had to decide that the details of what actually happened, the jammed weapon, the crash injuries, the cooperative Iraqi doctors, were less important than the story that the country and the war effort needed to hear. Was this malice? Was it incompetence? Was it the ordinary fog of a bureaucracy that needed good news and found a way to produce some? Probably all three, but the result was the same. A 19-year-old woman from West Virginia became a symbol of heroism she had never claimed, and a machine that was supposed to inform the public had instead performed for it. There were 9 other soldiers in that convoy who were taken that day. Some died in captivity, some survived and came home. Their names are not as well known as Jessica Lynch's, because their stories didn't produce footage, because their rescues, when they happened, were quieter, because the machinery of military public affairs had already found the story it needed, and there was only room for one. Specialist Thomas Downey had been driving the truck directly behind Jessica's. He survived the ambush with a gunshot wound to his left shoulder. He managed to get out of the kill zone. He was evacuated and treated. He watched the footage of the rescue on a television in a military hospital in Kuwait. Years later, in an interview, he said something simple. "She wasn't fighting. None of us were fighting. We were just trying not to die." Then he paused. That's also a kind of courage, but it's not the kind they were selling. The phrase prisoner of war carries weight in America. It carries weight because the country has a long, complicated relationship with what happens to its people when they fall into enemy hands. There are codes of conduct, there are treaties, there are protocols, and there is, underneath all of it, an unspoken compact between soldier and country. If you are taken, we will come for you. The country largely held to that compact in March of 2003. Special operations came for Jessica Lynch 9 days after she was taken. But the compact has a second part that gets talked about less. When you come home, we will tell your story honestly. That part did not hold. Here is the timeline, compressed. March 23rd, ambush. March 23rd, same day, Pentagon begins assembling the initial account, based on fragmentary field reports. March 31st, Special Operations Raid, footage filmed. April 1st, footage released, briefing distributed to reporters, story breaks nationally. April 2nd, the words G.I. Jane appear in the press for the first time. April 2nd, Jessica Lynch is still sedated in Germany. April 3rd, her parents give a brief statement to reporters on their front porch in West Virginia. April 4th, a retired general appears on 3 separate morning programs and describes the rescue in detail. April 5th, Jessica Lynch wakes up fully enough to be told what the country has been saying about her. 9 days from unconsciousness to national symbol. without a single conversation with the person at the center of it. Military public affairs is a profession. The people who do it are trained. They follow procedures. Most of them take the ethics of their work seriously. But military public affairs also exists structurally to serve the institution, not the individual soldier. When those two things align, the system works well. When they don't, when what is good for the institution's image diverges from what actually happened to the individual, the institution tends to win. Not through malice, through the ordinary operation of a bureaucracy under pressure. The journalist who first questioned the official account publicly, not the British reporter who called the hospital, but an American one, working for a smaller outlet in Washington, described the experience this way. I made calls. I asked questions. The answers I got from people on the ground didn't match the briefing. I wrote what I found. The story ran on a Tuesday. By Wednesday, a Pentagon spokesperson had issued a statement describing the reporting as irresponsible and harmful to morale. The reporter was not wrong. But being not wrong, in this instance, required absorbing a significant amount of institutional pressure. Most reporters, in the spring of 2003, chose differently. Not because they were dishonest, because the country was 2 weeks into a war, and questioning the story of a rescued soldier felt, in that moment, like the wrong kind of journalism to be doing. The right kind, apparently, was the kind that put that footage on loop. There is a photograph, taken at the airport in Charleston, West Virginia, when Jessica Lynch came home. She is in a wheelchair. She is wearing civilian clothes. There is a crowd behind the barrier, and her expression, described in various articles as emotional, as overcome, as grateful, is, if you look at the photograph carefully, something else. It is the expression of a person trying to be present in a moment that does not quite feel like hers. A moment that was prepared for her. A crowd that came to see a story they had been told. And a woman in a wheelchair trying to figure out how to be inside that story without disappearing into it. She managed it. That is the part worth holding on to. She managed to be a person inside a story that had been designed to consume her. She told the truth. She built a life. She went back to West Virginia. She taught children to read. One more thing. The doctors at the Saddam Hussein General Hospital. This needs to be said plainly. These were people operating in a city under siege, in a hospital running low on supplies, in a country that was being invaded. They took in an enemy soldier. They gave her blood transfusions from their own limited supply. They operated on her spine. They tried to return her before the special operations team arrived. In the official story, the one that played on loop in April of 2003, they were not mentioned. The story did not need them. The story needed a rescue from danger. A hospital full of doctors trying to keep a patient alive did not fit that frame. So it was left out, and the doctors went back to work, as doctors do. What is the honest lesson here? Not, don't trust the government. Not, the military is corrupt. Not, journalists are complicit in everything. The honest lesson is smaller and more uncomfortable than any of those. The honest lesson is this. Stories told about people in service of a larger purpose have a cost. The cost is usually paid by the person at the center of the story. And the people who told the story, the ones who built the briefing, who chose the footage, who repeated the account without checking it, They moved on to other stories, while Jessica Lynch came home to hers. She is in her early 40s now. She lives in West Virginia. She taught school for years. She has a family. She came through something that would have bent a lot of people into bitterness. And she didn't bend. She just, very quietly, very steadily, kept telling the truth. That is a kind of strength the morning shows never figured out how to film. Now, let's go back to the moment she opened her eyes. Jessica Lynch woke up in Landstuhl Regional Medical Center, Germany. The date was March 30th, 2003. The first thing she remembers asking for was water. The second thing she remembers is a nurse telling her that she was on the front page of every newspaper in America. She didn't understand what that meant. "What did I do?" she asked. The nurse looked at her for a long moment and didn't answer. She spent weeks in that hospital before she was told, fully, in detail, what had been said about her. Her mother came, her sister. Eventually, a public affairs officer from the army arrived with a folder and a carefully worded explanation of how the initial reports had been incomplete. Jessica listened. And then she asked a question nobody in that room was prepared for. Why didn't they just wait to find out what actually happened? Nobody answered that one either. Here is what the months after her rescue actually looked like. The part that didn't make the morning shows. She underwent multiple surgeries. Her spine had been damaged in ways that would require physical therapy for years. She lost some feeling in parts of her left leg that has never fully returned. She dealt with episodes of memory disruption that her doctors quietly attributed to the stress of what she had experienced. She was 20 years old. She had enlisted to get healthcare and a future, and she had come home with a body that would require ongoing medical attention for the rest of her life. The army offered her a medical discharge. She took it, and then the country moved on to the next story. But Jessica Lynch didn't move on. She had a specific problem. Every time she tried to talk about what had happened, to friends, to neighbors, to anyone who asked, the official story got in the way. People would say, "You're the one who fought back." And she would say, "That's not what happened." And they would look at her like she was confused, like a person who had been through something traumatic and wasn't quite remembering it right. Because the story they had been told was so vivid, so detailed, so emotionally complete that her actual account of events felt thin by comparison. The Pentagon's version had drama. Her version had a jammed weapon, a crashed truck, and doctors who gave her their own blood. Which one was America going to remember? Let me stop here and ask you something directly. Have you ever had someone else's version of your own life told back to you? Have you ever watched someone describe what you did, with confidence, with authority, and realized they had it completely wrong? And then watched the people around you believe that version over yours? That is what Jessica Lynch experienced, at national scale. The reckoning came slowly. The first crack appeared in the spring of 2003, about 6 weeks after the rescue. A reporter at a British newspaper, not an American one, called the Saddam Hussein General Hospital in Nasiriyah and spoke to one of the doctors who had treated her. His name was Harith al-Hussona. He had operated on her spine. He told the reporter, in careful English, that her wounds were not from bullets, that she had been treated well, that they had tried to return her, and had been unable to. That when the American soldiers arrived at 2 in the morning, there were no fighters in the building, and the hospital staff had not resisted. He said, "We heard the Americans were coming before they came. There was nothing to resist." The story ran in Britain. American outlets picked it up 24 hours later. By then, Jessica Lynch was already scheduled to testify before Congress. The congressional hearing was in April of 2004, 13 months after the ambush. By that point, the initial euphoria of her rescue had faded. The war itself had grown complicated in ways that made the morning shows in March of 2003 feel distant. She sat at a wooden table in a hearing room. She wore civilian clothes. She was no longer in the army. She was 21 years old, and she said, under oath, the things she had been saying privately for over a year. That she had not fired her weapon. That her injuries came from the crash. That the Iraqi medical staff had treated her with care. That she had not witnessed the heroic actions attributed to her. That she had been used as a symbol, her words, without her knowledge or consent. She also said she was grateful to the soldiers who had come to get her. She meant it. But she said the story they told about her before she woke up was not the truth. What happened after that testimony? Officially, investigations, reviews of how the initial briefing had been assembled, recommendations about verification protocols for combat reporting. Unofficially, nothing changed. The officials who had assembled the briefing were never disciplined. The reporters who had repeated it without verification were never formally criticized. The footage, the green-tinted night vision images that had played on loop for a week, continued to be used in documentary programs about the war for years afterward. And Jessica Lynch returned to Palestine, West Virginia. She enrolled in college. She studied education. She wanted to teach. She gave a few interviews over the years, carefully, on her own terms. In one of them, from 2007, the interviewer asked her whether she felt like a hero. She thought about it for a moment. "I feel like a person who went somewhere and came home," she said. "That's all I was trying to do." There's a detail from the night of the rescue that gets left out of most accounts. When the special operations team carried her out of the hospital on a stretcher, one of the Iraqi nurses, a woman who had been caring for her for 9 days, tried to come with them. Not to resist, not to interfere, to make sure she was okay. The soldiers stopped her at the door. Jessica Lynch, half conscious on the stretcher, reached out and touched the nurse's hand. The nurse stood in the doorway watching the convoy drive away. That moment happened. It is not in the official footage. Here is the larger question, the one that applies beyond 2003 and beyond Iraq. When a government tells a story about one of its soldiers, it is almost never purely about that soldier. It is about what the country needs to believe at that moment. In March of 2003, America needed to believe that its young people in uniform were fighting back, were winning, were triumphing against resistance. Jessica Lynch, unconscious in a hospital bed in a city called Nasiriyah, was handed a story that served that need. She did not choose it. She could not refuse it. She didn't even know it was happening. Does this mean the people who assembled the briefing were evil? Not necessarily. It means they were operating inside a system that rewards certain kinds of stories over others. A system that, in the early days of a war that was not going cleanly, needed a win badly enough to describe one before the facts were in. She was honored without her knowledge. She was turned into a symbol without her consent. And when she told the truth, the people who had built the symbol largely moved on and left her to live inside it. This is not a story that should make you angry at the soldiers who raided that hospital. They were doing their jobs. They went into a dark building in a hostile city in the middle of the night to bring home someone who needed help. That is not nothing. And it is not a story that should make you despair about the country. Jessica Lynch is fine. She built a life. She taught school for years in a county not far from where she grew up. She got married. She raised kids. The story did not break her. What it did, and this is worth sitting with, is demonstrate what happens when the story a nation tells about its people becomes more important than the people themselves. When the symbol outlasts the facts. When nobody stops to ask the person at the center of it what actually happened. Because they're too busy telling everyone else. Let's go back to the convoy for a moment, because there's a piece of that morning that deserves more attention than it usually gets. The 507 Maintenance Company was not supposed to be where it was. The route they were given had been designed to bypass Nasiriyah. Somewhere between the planning room and the road, the information changed, or wasn't passed down clearly, or was misread under pressure. The result was that a unit of supply clerks and mechanics, people trained to fix trucks, not fight battles, drove into a city that the infantry hadn't secured yet. 11 of them died for that navigation error. Nobody was ever publicly held responsible for the route. Nobody was court-martialed. Nobody's career ended over it. The Army's official investigation concluded that the convoy had taken a wrong turn under combat conditions, and that such things happen in war, which is true. But it is also true that Jessica's legs were broken because of it, and that 11 families buried someone because of it, and that the subsequent media story, the heroic rescue, the female warrior, served, among other things, to redirect attention from the question of why that convoy was there at all. This is the second layer of the story, not just the Pentagon got it wrong about what happened during the ambush, but the story of the rescue crowded out the story of the wrong turn. Replace a question nobody wants to answer, why were maintenance clerks sent into an unsecured city, with a story everyone wants to watch, the rescue of a brave young woman under fire. One story asks for accountability, the other asks for gratitude. Guess which one the morning shows chose. Jessica Lynch was not the first. She was not the last. The pattern she experienced, a soldier becomes a symbol, the symbol diverges from the soldier's actual experience, the soldier's attempts to correct the record are met with confusion or resistance. This pattern has repeated enough times that military historians have given it a name. They call it heroic inflation. The mechanism is always similar. In the fog of early reporting, details are uncertain. Someone with access to a microphone, a spokesperson, a senior officer, a politician, fills the uncertainty with the best available story. The best available story is usually the one that reflects most favorably on American forces and most clearly on American values. It gets repeated. It becomes the record. And when the actual record contradicts it, the actual record has to fight uphill against a version already embedded in people's memories. Here is what is hardest to sit with. The people who inflated Jessica's story were, in many cases, people who genuinely cared about her. They were trying to protect her, to give her an honorable story to come home to. They didn't ask whether she wanted that story. They didn't ask whether she had a different one. They assumed that what they were building was doing her a favor. And maybe, if everything they said had been true, it would have been. But when the story isn't true, doing someone a favor starts to look different. It starts to look like making her life harder in ways you didn't anticipate. Like putting words in her mouth in front of the entire country. Like creating a version of her that she would have to spend years quietly correcting. She corrected it. That's the part the story usually skips past. It would be easy, and understandable, for a 20-year-old with multiple fractures and an uncertain future to say nothing. To accept the version the country had given her. To cash in, briefly, on the celebrity that the Pentagon's story had created. Some people in her position have done that. Jessica Lynch didn't. In the summer of 2003, while she was still in physical therapy, a reporter from a magazine in New York called her. The reporter wanted to do a profile, the real story of Jessica Lynch, they called it, expecting something close to the official version, maybe with some emotional color added. She gave them something different. She told them the weapon had jammed. She told them about the crash. She told them about the Iraqi nurse who had held her hand when she was in pain. The magazine ran the story. It was not the story anyone expected. And for a week or two, it created a small storm. Think pieces, op-eds, military spokespeople clarifying and re-clarifying the original briefing. And then the news cycle moved on, as it does. What Jessica carried out of all of it was something that didn't make the op-eds. She carried an understanding that most people learn abstractly, if they learn it at all, that a story told about you, without you, is a kind of capture. A different kind than what happened in Nasiriyah, but a capture nonetheless. Someone else has your image. Someone else has your words. Someone else has the version of events the public has attached to your name. And getting it back, telling the actual story, the one you lived, is harder than it sounds. Because the other story is already out there, and it has a head start. She did it anyway. Over the years, quietly, steadily, she told the real version whenever she was asked. She didn't make a career out of it. She didn't go on television and denounce anyone. She just kept saying to whoever asked, "Here is what happened. The weapon jammed. The truck crashed. The doctors helped me. The rescue wasn't opposed. Here is what happened." There's a reason this story still matters, 20 years after the fact. It is not because the military lies more than other institutions. It is because the machinery that produced the original story has not fundamentally changed. The incentive to fill an information vacuum with the best available narrative, rather than with verified facts, is structural. It is not a function of bad people. It is a function of systems that reward speed and clarity and emotional resonance at the expense of accuracy. That machinery works the same way today. It worked in 2003 in Nasiriyah. It has worked since, and it will work again. The question is not whether this happens. The question is whether, when it happens, there is someone willing to sit at a table in a congressional hearing room and say, calmly, under oath, that is not what happened. Jessica Lynch did that. At 21 years old, with a damaged spine and a country that had already made up its mind about her. She sat at that table and she told the truth. Not because it was easy, not because anyone was asking her to, but because the alternative, letting a false story stand in her name about her life, was something she simply could not do. She became a teacher, elementary school, in a county about 30 miles from where she grew up. For years, she drove that road every morning, and the kids she taught did not know who she was. They knew her as the woman who read to them on Friday afternoons, and who kept a jar of pens on her desk, and who never raised her voice. That was enough. That was, by her own account, more than enough. The nurse. I keep coming back to the nurse. The woman who stood in the doorway of that hospital in Nasiriyah and watched the convoy drive away. Her name has never appeared in any official account of the rescue. She treated Jessica for 9 days. She held her hand when she was in pain. She tried to follow the stretcher out the door to make sure the patient she had cared for was going to be okay. And then the door closed, and she went back to work. Because there were other patients. Because that is what you do when you are a nurse and there is work to be done. What do you do with a story like this? Not the false version, the real one. A young woman from a small town in West Virginia who joined the military because her family needed the money, who drove into an ambush because of a navigation error no one has been held responsible for, who was treated with care by people the official story described as her captors, who came home to a country that had already decided who she was and what she had done, and who, quietly, persistently, over years, refused to let that version stand. You sit with it. You sit with the discomfort of a story that doesn't resolve cleanly into good guys and bad guys. You sit with the fact that the people who got it wrong were not, most of them, trying to do harm. And you sit with the woman at the center of it, the one who told the truth because it was the truth. The one who taught school for years in a county most people couldn't find on a map. The one who, if you asked her today, would tell you the same thing she told the magazine in 2003. The weapon jammed. The truck crashed. The doctors helped her, and she came home. That is the whole story. Not the one the country was given, the one that actually happened. If you watched this story to the end, write one word in the comments. Home. And tell us what city you're watching from. One final detail about that night. When the Special Operations team left the hospital with Jessica Lynch on the stretcher, they moved fast. Trained people always move fast. But one soldier, a young staff sergeant, according to accounts collected later, stopped at the door and looked back at the hospital staff standing in the corridor. He said nothing. He didn't have the language, and there wasn't time. But he stopped for maybe 3 seconds, and then he turned and ran to catch up with the convoy. 3 seconds. In a building where people had worked for 9 days to keep an enemy soldier alive. He acknowledged it. That's something. It is not enough, but it is something.